this video, I want to talk about the pitfalls of the victim mentality. So the thing about seeing yourself as a victim in any circumstance is that just by way of that, you have to, within your storyline, create a villain. And when we do this, so in terms of our projection, when we have by necessity this perspective function where we have to make something or someone or an institution into this villain, into this thing that needs to be attacked, then we lower our vibration. And it is so crucial that we understand this when we look at our pathway towards higher consciousness and ascended thinking or thought forms. Because again, in all circumstance, it doesn't matter what is going on in your external reality. If you can look at it in terms of the fact that you are empowered and whatever is going on is a challenge with a solution to it, then again, it refocuses your perspective and puts all of the power back in your hands. Now, again, there are going to be some isolated instances where you could find examples where it would be almost impossible for you to feel not in a sense a victim of something. So an example of this would be, let's say, that there was a serial killer and you were locked in his basement. Again, this is sort of a macabre example, but we're going to go to the absolute extreme of where an individual would feel victim of something. But still, in and of that, okay, it doesn't matter what circumstance you are in, even though that is a very, very distorted external circumstance, if you can turn the focus back around to empowering the self, you're always going to have a better chance of making it through that situation. So again, there can be many, many extreme challenges. Certainly most of us will not go through something like being locked by a serial killer in the basement. And I would have the compassion for anybody that has gone through an experience like that. So I don't want to not seem like those sort of things do happen in the world. But what I'm trying to teach is that when we're in these very difficult situations, our mindset, our outlook, our acclamation towards the positive is what gives us the best chance of overcoming the obstacles that are in our midst. And most of the time, generally, in terms of what we are experiencing, generally, a lot of the victimhood is incorrect perception. So we have become distorted in our thinking. We have created external situations where it's more of our mind that is keeping us trapped there than truly somebody having us tied up in a basement, okay? And some of the ways that we can trap ourselves or push ourselves into this victim mentality are things that are programmed into us, whether they are societally programmed into us, if it's programmed in terms of the parental structure, institutional structures that have given us parameters that we should or that we feel that we must exist within. So when we see the external manifestation of what we are experiencing, oftentimes it's safer, or it seems safer, to become a victim of our circumstance, and that way we can essentially stay stuck and do nothing. But what also is layered into this victim mentality is a certain permission within the ego mind and the consciousness concerning creating these villains in our external world. And when we create villains of people, places, and things, it allows us within our consciousness engage in attack type behaviors towards what we perceive is the villain. And this can really manifest in different ways, okay? It can be verbal attacks. It could be attacks of energy, which again get confused because when you're energetically really focusing in a negative way on any person, place, or thing, you're actually chemically changing your own structure of your body, and you're hurting yourself through these really low vibrational thought forms. And if it is something where it is a specific outward attack, so you're verbally attacking people, you're physically attacking people, it's always, again, because one has perceived that the other is deserving of that attack. But again, that is a vicious cycle, because even if another has wronged you, even if another individual or institution has hurt you, you're never going to solve or fix that hurt that you've received by doling out or giving more hurt within that cycle. So the only way to truly heal is through the mechanism of higher consciousness, higher thinking, and forgiveness. That doesn't mean that when another individual hurts you, that you allow that hurt to happen over and over and over, or that you stay there to, essentially take as many punches as they'll dole out. You still have to have logical reason and, a self-worth perspective where you are putting yourself in the best possible situation. But part of putting yourself in the best possible situation is about creating thoughts within your mental construct that are positive. Because when we're thinking positively, when we have a positively acclimated outlook on life, and when we don't feel that we are oppressed or victimized by anybody else, we feel empowered and we move into a different type of energy. And the type of energy that we move into is more of a grounded yet divine or spiritual energy. This is where there's sort of a neutral point, okay, between that lower or the lower vibrational thought forms where, again, we are in that fear, lack, victimhood mentality. Then there's sort of this neutral point where, again, we haven't really ascended into that divine way of thinking, but we're sort of neutral. And this is a great place to be when we're in that analysis mode. We may not have the higher vibrational states of consciousness completely figured out yet, but at least we're not lowering our consciousness. We're not residing in that victimhood mentality. So a lot of learning actually goes on in this neutral zone where, again, we're not really expanding, but we're also not really contracting. And once we've sort of settled in this neutral point and really taken the time to do the learning, to do the seeking and the discovery, we start to, by way of empowerment, rise in terms of our thought forms and therefore our vibrational frequency. And that neutral zone essentially becomes the springboard for how we acclimate to a higher and higher state of consciousness, which is really what that ascension process is. And as we move up towards that union with spirit, we start to think from a higher vantage point. And in terms of religion and a more spiritualistic perspective, this is where we lean into God, essentially. We are never a victim of everything because we know that when we essentially join with God's mind, or that God is within us, God is protecting us, then we can create and we can essentially do magnificent things. We're no longer stuck in these lower vibrational centers. And that's truly, again, as we move up to the heart center, okay? Because again, the heart is the really springboard point in terms of the transition of our consciousness. Everything below that heart-centered consciousness is very primal, fear-based thinking. And it's not that the lower functionality of conception is wrong. if we look at it in terms of essentially evolution, okay, if we think of the evolution of consciousness, there was a reason when we were hunted, when we were in that state where there was other animals attacking us, for us to really have a consciousness that was attuned to survival. And we, by necessity, had to reside in those lower primal centers to get through our daily lives. But as we have moved into an environment with modern conveniences where really we don't have to think so much about our basic survival needs, this is the point where consciousness can expand and it can start to learn and maneuver in different ways. And this is again where we see that heart openness. This is where that heart chakra can begin to essentially unlock the gateways to those higher forms of consciousness. And as we transcend those lower centers, we really start to actually experience life in a different way. Now, to a lot of individuals that haven't had an awakening experience or a higher vibrational experience with their external world, this won't really make sense. But if you have had this opening up of reality, you'll know exactly what I mean by this. And you actually experience what is your external reality in a totally different dimension. It becomes more luminescent. It becomes, colors are richer, experiences are richer. The way in which your mind actually perceives the external world is quite different than the way that the mind or the consciousness perceives the external world when you are seeing through those lower chakra centers. So just to kind of round out this video or wrap it up, so to speak, one of the things that you can really work on in terms of maneuvering your consciousness into a more bright and exciting, expansive state is to really work on taking yourself out of this victim mentality. The more you work on that, and the more that you really start to pay attention to any time you are feeling in this victim energy, or when you are planning attacks, so to speak. So if your mind wishes to attack another or wishes to see another as a villain, and however that is out manifesting, whether that is through jealousy, gossip, doing things that are manipulative or distorted against another, that is a form of attack. Any form of dishonesty or distortion, again, is a form of attack because it's not authentically unconditional loving energy. So anytime you are experiencing yourself migrating into these lower states of consciousness, you really want to pay attention to them and really work with that energy and work to move your energy up to the higher centers. And in terms of those around you, if you have gotten to a point where you have done a lot of your learning from this neutral standpoint and you're really residing most of the time in this sort of ascended, higher vibrational view, then you can take the time, you should have the energy to be able to help those around you identify some of those things. But again, you never want to be preachy because generally people will start to ask questions when they're ready. And being too preachy in terms of they should do this or they should do that, I found doesn't really work. So they have to almost, via osmosis, want to engage with you because their consciousness is ready to take that next step. That's a lot of the reason why I tend to make these videos instead of, getting involved in the lives of people around me and saying, you know what, you could really do this differently, or, the way that you're acting is kind of lower vibrational, and trying to explain that to them. It just often doesn't work. They are not at a state of consciousness to even conceptualize what I would be saying to them. A lot of it wouldn't make sense, and most of the time it's actually not going to be a good experience when you're talking in this way. If somebody, isn't even, if these kind of, not self-regulatory, but so essentially if the desire for self-discovery and the seeking in terms of one's self-regulation and the desire to ascend in consciousness isn't something that's even on their radar, it's not going to be a good outcome in terms of you being a guide or a teacher. So for myself, again, it's just easier for me to talk to a camera, and those that are ready to hear the lesson will naturally gravitate to it. And those that are not ready to hear the lesson have other lower lessons that they have to learn first. And a lot of those lower vibrational lessons come actually through a lot of contrast, sometimes pain and suffering. And it takes sometimes many of these lessons to get to the point where one realizes that it's really the self that needs transformation, and they are not imposing some of their distorted thought forms onto the external world, when really, again, it is a personal journey. So I'm not sure that completely made sense, but I'm trying to put it all together without having a script in front of me. Essentially, again, just staying out of that victim mentality. I'm going to wrap up this video and make a few others that I had intended to make today. Again, if there's any comments or questions, please comment on the video. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have or respond to anything in terms of your own questioning. I always love doing that. And again, we'll see you in the next video.